Think for a moment. You are locked inside a place where no one has ever escaped. Not once. Not ever. Above you is a solid concrete ceiling. Below you is cold, damp stone. And all around you, the Pacific Ocean. Black, freezing, violent water that has swallowed men whole. This is not a movie. This is not a novel. This is the night the world's most powerful prison died. June 11th, 1962. It was close to 9:30 at night. A guard made his routine round. He looked into 3 cells. In each one, a man lay sleeping under a blanket. Everything was normal. Morning came. The guard returned. He called out. No answer. He opened the door, walked inside, and screaming, he slammed his baton down onto one of the sleeping heads. That head flew off the bed and crashed onto the floor. The guard's nose broke on impact. But there was no blood, because that was not a human head. It was plaster. It was soap. It was toilet paper. And pressed into it, real human hair cut from real men inside this very prison. 3 inmates had left their dummies sleeping in their beds, and they themselves were gone. Where? How? When? The FBI, Coast Guard, Army, Highway Patrol, and local police all scrambled. The ocean was searched. The island was combed inch by inch. But nothing was found. No bodies, no living men, no solid evidence. And today, more than 60 years later, this case is still open. This is the story of the greatest prison break in American history. And this story is not over yet. San Francisco, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The Golden Bridge, the Blue Bay, the fog that rolls in like a curtain every evening. And out there in the water, a lonely, dark, jagged piece of rock. Alcatraz Island. Just 22 acres, but those 22 acres held the most dangerous address in America. It started as a lighthouse, then became a fort, then a military prison. And in 1934, the federal government turned it into something the world had never seen before, a maximum security penitentiary designed specifically for the most dangerous criminals in the United States. They called it the Rock. Not because of its name, because of what it was built on. A massive slab of natural rock rising out of the Pacific, surrounded on all sides by freezing cold water and violent currents. The average water temperature around Alcatraz was between 50 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit. That is cold enough to cause muscle failure and hypothermia within minutes. The currents around the island were among the strongest on the west coast. Even experienced swimmers had drowned attempting to cross that stretch of water. And if somehow, by some miracle, a man made it out of the water, he still had to get past the San Francisco Bay coastline, where police patrols ran around the clock. The prison itself was no easier. Double fences of 12-foot barbed wire surrounded the facility. Guard towers were manned 24 hours a day. Inmates were counted 12 times every single day, every 2 hours, day and night. The cells were narrow, cold, and built with solid steel bars. The walls were reinforced concrete nearly a foot thick. Between 1934 and 1963, some of the most feared criminals in American history were held inside these walls. Al Capone, the most powerful gangster in the country, served time here and was broken by it. George Machine Gun Kelly, bank robber and kidnapper, sat inside these cells. Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, spent years here in isolation. In 29 years of operation, 36 inmates attempted to escape. 23 were caught. 6 were shot and killed. 2 drowned. 5 vanished and were presumed dead. Not a single confirmed successful escape had ever been recorded. The prison's reputation was absolute. Its message to every inmate was simple and brutal. There is no way out. But 4 men did not believe that message, and they were about to prove the entire world wrong. Every great heist has its crew. Every impossible plan needs the right people. And what happened on the night of June 11th, 1962, was built on 4 very specific human beings, each one broken by life in a different way, each one carrying a fury that the world had never properly dealt with. The first man was Allen West. West was a career criminal in the truest sense. By the time he arrived at Alcatraz in 1957, he had already been arrested more than 20 times, mostly for car theft and petty robbery. He was not the most dangerous man in the prison. He was not the smartest. But he had something the others needed desperately: time. West had spent years inside Alcatraz. He knew your guards changed shifts. He knew which corridors were rarely walked. He knew the blind spots in the watchtowers. He had mapped this place in his mind the way a general maps a battlefield. He was the insider. He was the institutional knowledge. The second man was Frank Morris, and Frank Morris was different from everyone else. He was born into nothing. His parents abandoned him when he was 11 years old. By 13, he was already committing crimes. His childhood was not a home. It was a series of juvenile facilities, reform schools, and eventually adult prisons. But here is what made Morris unlike any other criminal in that building. 133. That placed him in the top 2% of human intelligence. He was not just smart, he was brilliant. He could look at a problem and see angles that most people could not even imagine existed. He could plan. He could adapt. He could think 10 steps ahead. He had escaped from multiple prisons before Alcatraz, not by violence, not by luck, by thinking, by observing, by being patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. After robbing a bank in Louisiana and escaping from the state penitentiary there, he was finally captured. He was sent to the one place they believed could hold him. In January 1960, Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz. He arrived looking. Already looking. Already thinking. The third and fourth men were brothers, John Anglin and Clarence Anglin. They grew up poor in rural Georgia, the sons of migrant farm workers. By the time they were teenagers, they had already developed two very distinct skills. The first was robbery. They stole to survive, then kept stealing long after survival stopped being the reason. The second skill was swimming. The Anglin brothers grew up near water. They swam in lakes and rivers from childhood. Nothing of long distances in open water. This detail, this one specific detail, would become one of the most important parts of what was about to happen. Their criminal careers escalated steadily. Small thefts became bigger ones. Eventually, they robbed the Columbia Savings Bank in Alabama. John was arrested and sentenced to 15 years. Clarence was caught shortly after and given 10 years. Both were sent to Alcatraz. John in late 1960, Clarence in early 1961. Now, all four were in the same building, and they found each other. It was not dramatic. It was gradual. In the mess hall over meals, during the 1 hour of recreation, during work assignments. Four men who had all tried to escape from prisons before. Four men who all looked at Alcatraz the way a chess player looks at a board. Not as something fixed, but as something with weaknesses waiting to be found. They began to talk, quietly, in fragments, in whispers that could not be heard above the noise of 500 other inmates. And slowly, the plan began to form. The first thing they needed was proximity. They were housed in different cell blocks. To coordinate anything, to share tools, to cover for each other, to work together at night, they needed to be near each other. Adjacent cells. Same block. They arranged it. Through careful requests to prison staff, through gaming the system in ways that raised no red flags, all four men were moved into B block, side by side, close enough to whisper through the walls. Their first objective was achieved without anyone suspecting a thing. Now Frank Morris began the real work. He studied the prison the way an architect studies a building. He looked at everything: the construction, the age of the materials, the maintenance schedules, the places where the design had corners cut decades ago. And he found it. B block had a utility corridor running behind the cells, a narrow, dark passage filled with pipes, heating ducts, and electrical conduits. Maintenance workers rarely entered it. Guards almost never walked through it. It was essentially unmonitored. More importantly, access to it was through ventilation grates at the back of each cell. And those grates were surrounded by concrete that was old, weakened by decades of moisture and salt air from the bay. And above the cell house, there was a rooftop ventilation shaft, one that had never been properly sealed with reinforced concrete, one that a man could, in theory, open from inside. The route was forming in Morris's mind. Cell, ventilation grate, utility corridor, roof shaft, roof, fence, water, freedom. 6 steps. Each one seemed impossible. Together, they formed the only possible path. Now came the question of tools. They had nothing. No drills, no saws, no wire cutters. Everything that could be used as a tool or a weapon was counted and cataloged inside Alcatraz. So they made their own. From the kitchen, they stole spoons. Metal spoons with handles that could be sharpened against the concrete floor over hundreds of hours into crude chisels. These became their primary digging instruments. But chisels alone were too slow. The concrete walls were 8 inches thick, solid. A spoon moving by hand against that material would take years. Morris thought differently. He obtained a vacuum cleaner motor from the maintenance supply area. He modified it. He built a working drill from parts that no one would ever think to connect. It was crude, but it worked. And then there was the noise problem. The drilling and digging could not be done in silence. The sound would travel through the walls. A guard walking the corridor would hear it instantly. But there was 1 hour every day when it did not matter. Music hour. Alcatraz allowed inmates 1 hour of loud music each day. Every afternoon, music was piped through the cell block at significant volume. During this 1 hour, the sound of digging was completely masked. They dug only during music hour, never a moment outside of it. They rotated, 1 man digging, 1 man watching the corridor for guards. Week after week, month after month, the concrete around their ventilation grates slowly, quietly, invisibly gave way. To hide the progress, they crafted fake ventilation grates from cardboard, painted to match the originals exactly, pressed into the openings after every session so that from outside the cell, everything appeared untouched. Guards walked past dozens of times every day and saw nothing unusual. When the holes were finally large enough, and this took the better part of a year, they could slide out of their cells at night. They could move through the utility corridor in complete darkness and reach their secret workspace above the cell block. Up there, in the hidden space above the ceiling of B block, they built a covert manufacturing operation. They had been stealing materials from every part of the prison for months, from the kitchen, from the laundry, from the maintenance workshop. Small amounts, never enough to trigger suspicion, but accumulated across many months, it added up to something remarkable. 50+ raincoats were stolen piece by piece from the prison laundry. These raincoats were stitched together by hand, in darkness, in a space where no guard ever looked. They were sealed using heat from the nearby pipes. The result was a rubber raft. Crude, imperfect, but functional enough to float several men across a stretch of open water. Life jackets were fashioned from the same materials, shaped and sealed in the same workshop. For propulsion, they carved paddles from pieces of scrap wood, fastened together with screws stolen from various work areas over many months. To inflate the raft, Frank Morris used an ingenious solution. He played the concertina, a small accordion-like instrument. Guards thought nothing of it. What no one realized was that Morris had figured out how to use the concertina as a bellows. With it, he could inflate the raincoat raft without needing any mechanical pump. And while all of this was being built above the ceiling, they were simultaneously working on the final barrier, the roof ventilation shaft. The shaft cover at the top of the cell house was bolted in place. Over many nighttime excursions, they worked the bolts loose. Slowly, carefully, always retightening them before morning so that nothing appeared disturbed. By spring of 1962, the plan was complete. The holes in their cells could be opened and resealed in minutes. The utility corridor was their private highway. The workshop above was stocked and ready. The raft and life jackets were prepared. The roof shaft was loose, and the four men had rehearsed every step so many times they could do it in total darkness. They were ready. June 11th, 1962. It was a Tuesday. The day passed like every other day at Alcatraz. Breakfast, work assignments, lunch, recreation, dinner. Hundreds of inmates moving through their schedules. Guards counting, recording, observing. Everything exactly as it always was. Nobody knew that this was the last normal day Alcatraz would ever have. At 9:30 that evening, the lights went out. The standard night silence fell over the cell block. Guards began their rounds. Flashlight beams swept across bars, heads visible under blankets in each cell. Everything checked out. The prison settled into its nighttime rhythm. And then Frank Morris made the call. He signaled through the wall. Tonight. It happens tonight. Three of them moved fast. Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin each reached under their sinks. They pulled out the fake ventilation grates. They pushed through the holes they had spent nearly a year creating. One by one, they slipped into the utility corridor behind their cells. The fourth man, Alan West, was still in his cell. His hole had been patched more firmly than the others. The concrete around his grate had set more solidly, and now it would not come free. He worked furiously in the dark, scraping, pushing, trying to break the seal. His partners on the other side tried to help, pulling from their end, but it would not open. The minutes passed. The gap between West and freedom would not close. Morris made the decision that all leaders eventually face. The plan cannot wait for one person. He signaled to the Anglin brothers. They were going. West would have to find his own way or return to his cell. The three men collected everything from the workshop above the cell block: the raft, the life jackets, the paddles. They moved through the now fully loosened roof ventilation shaft and came out onto the top of the cell house. Above them, open sky, cold Pacific air, fog moving slowly across the bay. Around them, silence. The watchtowers were lit. Guards were visible in their positions. The drop to the ground below was significant. They moved in absolute silence across 100 feet of rooftop. Not a word, not a sound. Their rubber-soled shoes made no noise on the concrete surface. At the edge, they used the drain pipes to lower themselves to the ground, hand over hand. Controlled, quiet. On the ground now, inside the perimeter, still inside Alcatraz. They moved along the outer wall, staying in darkness, timing their movements against the sweep of the tower lights. They had studied those lights for months. They knew the patterns. The 12-foot barbed wire fence loomed ahead. Two of them, back to back, with a gap between. They were the first moving carefully, using their arms and legs to navigate the barbed wire without making noise. They hit the ground on the other side. They were outside the prison compound, but they were still on the island. They moved toward the water, a specific point on the shoreline, one they had identified long ago. A small stretch of rocky beach where the darkness was complete. They inflated the raft. Morris played the concertina, that same instrument the guards had heard him play hundreds of times. pumping air into their homemade vessel in the dark. The raft took shape on the rocky shore. They pulled on their raincoat life jackets. They placed the raft at the water's edge, and then they pushed off. The freezing water closed around the bottom of the raft immediately. The current grabbed them. The Pacific at night, in June, in the waters around Alcatraz, is not calm. It is dark, and it is strong, and it does not care about plans. They paddled. Behind them, Alcatraz sat in the darkness. Every light exactly where it had always been. Every guard exactly at their post. The dummy heads lying peacefully on their pillows. Most secure prison had no idea what had just happened. June 12, 1962, early morning. The guard walked his count, shone his flashlight through the bars. 3 cells, 3 sleeping figures. He continued his round. The next count came. Same result. Normal. But at morning assembly, when bodies needed to stand and be counted, 3 cells remained silent. The guard walked back, called out. No movement. He opened the first cell, walked to the bed, and brought his baton down hard. The head flew off the bed and hit the floor. It took several seconds for what had happened to register. Then everything broke loose. Within minutes, Alcatraz was in full lockdown. Every inmate was pulled from their cell and counted. The utility corridor behind B Block was breached and searched. The secret workshop above the ceiling was discovered. 3 holes in 3 cell walls, expertly disguised, nearly undetectable. On the roof, footprints. At the fence, marks where the wire had been carefully navigated. At the water's edge, nothing. Just the bay, moving as it always moved. The warden made the call that every official had believed would never need to be made. 3 inmates had escaped from Alcatraz. Within hours, the response was overwhelming. The FBI was on the island. The Coast Guard was in the water. The Army was mobilized. The California Highway Patrol, county sheriffs, and San Francisco police all joined the manhunt. Alan West, still in his cell, was interrogated immediately. He confessed within minutes. He told them the plan, the route, the materials, the timeline. According to West, after reaching the water, they planned to paddle to Angel Island, just over a mile north of Alcatraz. From there, cross the Raccoon Strait to Marin County on the mainland, steal a car and civilian clothes, and disappear into the country. The FBI took his information and acted immediately. 2 days later, June 14th, a paddle was found on the south coast of Angel Island. It matched West's description exactly. Same screws, same wood. On the same day, a small rubber packet was recovered from the water nearby. Inside it, family photographs and personal letters belonging to the Anglin brothers. Days after that, near the Golden Gate Bridge, a fragment of a deflated rubber raft was pulled from the water. And 50 yards offshore from Alcatraz itself, a fully inflated life jacket was found floating. The evidence told a story. But that story had 2 very different possible endings. The FBI assembled everything and reached their conclusion. The cold water, the powerful currents, the crude raft, the weight of 3 men, the scattered debris. The raft had failed. The men had gone into the water. The cold had killed them within minutes. Official verdict? Presumed dead. It seemed like the logical answer, but logic and truth are not always the same thing. If the 3 men had drowned, the case should have closed within weeks. Bodies surface, evidence settles, trails go cold. Instead, over the next 60 years, something kept happening. Things kept appearing that should not have been there if those men were dead. The first crack in the official story came almost immediately. In December 1962, just 6 months after the escape, another inmate named John Paul Scott broke out of Alcatraz. He swam the entire distance to San Francisco without a raft, without a life jacket, in the same freezing water. He made it. He was found on the shore, exhausted and hypothermic, and taken back into custody. But here was the point no one could ignore. If an unprepared man with nothing could swim from Alcatraz to the mainland, then 3 men with a raft, life jackets, and months of planning were considerably more likely to survive. The Anglin brothers were known strong swimmers from childhood. The idea that these 2 men, with full equipment, could not cover the same distance an unprepared prisoner covered 6 months later was very difficult to argue. Then the postcards started. Beginning in December 1962, the same year as the escape, the Anglin family began receiving cards. No return address, no name, no traceable postmark. Every Christmas, a card arrived. Every Mother's Day, flowers were delivered to the Anglin family home, addressed to their mother. This continued without interruption until 1973, the year their mother died. The FBI was aware of these deliveries. They were documented. They were investigated. No source was ever confirmed. But what was the alternative? That someone impersonated 2 dead men to send flowers to their elderly mother for 11 consecutive years? Then came the funerals. When the Anglin mother passed in 1973, 2 tall women attended the funeral. No one in the family recognized them. They wore heavy makeup. They were significantly larger than the average woman. They stayed briefly, spoke to no one, and left before anyone could approach. Family members later said, quietly at first, then openly, that those 2 women were John and Clarence Anglin in disguise. When the Anglin father died some years later, 2 tall, bearded strangers appeared at that funeral. They stood in the back. They wept. They left before the service ended and were never identified. In 2008, their brother, Robert Anglin, lay dying. In his final days, he told his family not to worry about John and Clarence. He said he had been in contact with both of them since 1963. He said they were safe. Then there was the account of Bud White, Frank Morris's cousin. White said that in the days after the escape, Morris had appeared in San Diego and met him at a park. White's daughter, who was present that day as a child, confirmed the meeting in later years. These were not rumors. These were sworn statements from identifiable people with nothing obvious to gain. The FBI logged them all, investigated them all, confirmed none of them definitively. But the accounts kept accumulating. Each one on its own could be dismissed. Together, they formed something much harder to ignore. For 17 years, from 1962 to 1979, the FBI ran the investigation. They followed leads across multiple states, tracked down family members, interviewed former inmates, consulted oceanographers. In 1979, exhausted and out of leads, the FBI officially closed the case. They handed responsibility to the United States Marshal Service. The Marshals kept the case open, which meant, legally, if any of the three men were alive anywhere in the world, they were still wanted. For 2 decades, the case moved slowly through different hands. The 1962 evidence sat in boxes. The witness statements aged. The leads from the 60s and 70s became harder to verify. Then, in 2003, a marshal named Michael Dyke picked up the file. Dyke was different. He approached it not as a 40-year-old mystery to be managed, but as an active investigation to be solved. He began pulling every piece of documentation, evidence reports, witness statements, FBI memos, local police logs, reading them all with fresh eyes. In the Marin County police records, he found something that had been sitting untouched for 4 decades. A police report from the night of June 11, 1962. A car had been stolen that night in Marin County, the exact location where Alan West said they planned to come ashore. An eyewitness had seen 3 men take the vehicle. It was a blue Chevrolet. The following day, that same car was spotted in Stockton, California, roughly 100 miles away, traveling at high speed, nearly colliding with another vehicle. The near collision prompted a complaint at the Stockton police station. 3 men in a stolen car moving fast away from San Francisco the morning after the escape. This was not a coincidence. This was movement. This was 3 people using the exact route, the exact method, the exact time frame the plan had specified. The question was, why this report was never connected to the escape investigation in 1962. The answer was simple and infuriating. It was logged at a different station in a different county with no centralized system to cross-reference it. It simply sat in a cabinet and was never seen by the FBI. By the time Dyke found it in 2003, the trail was cold in every practical sense. The car was long gone. The witnesses were dead or unlocatable. The men, if they were the escapees, had had 40 years to disappear. But the discovery confirmed something crucial. The official presumption of death was built on an absence of evidence, not on evidence of death. The case was not closed. It had never really been answered. In 2015, a retired investigator working with the Anglin family received something remarkable. A family friend named Fred Brizzi had given the family a photograph back in 1992. He said he had taken it in Brazil in 1975, 13 years after the escape. In the photograph, 2 men stood together. They were wearing sunglasses. They were smiling. They appeared relaxed, comfortable, not like men in hiding. The Anglin family said with certainty that those 2 men were John and Clarence. The photograph was kept private for years. Eventually, it was turned over to investigators. In 2020, facial recognition analysis was conducted using advanced AI technology. The faces in the 1975 Brazil photograph were compared against official prison photographs taken at Alcatraz. The result was a match. Not a definitive legal confirmation. Facial recognition has its limitations. The photograph was taken from a distance in imperfect lighting. But the match was strong enough that investigators could not dismiss it. If the photograph was genuine, if those two men were who the family said they were, then John and Clarence Anglin had survived and made it to South America, alive and well 13 years after the world had declared them presumed dead. And then, in 2018, something happened that changed the entire conversation. The San Francisco Police Department held a press conference. They had received a letter, actually arriving in 2013, 5 years earlier. Its contents had been verified and analyzed before going public. The letter was signed with a name, John Anglin. In the letter, the writer identified himself as John William Anglin, formerly of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, inmate number 1476. He described the night of the escape in detail that matched all known facts precisely. The route, the raft, the life jackets, the fence crossing, the water. And then he said what no official had ever been able to confirm or deny. All three of them had made it. They had crossed the water. They had reached the mainland. They had separated and disappeared. The writer stated that Frank Morris had died in 2008. Clarence Anglin had died in 2011. And he himself, John Anglin, was 83 years old, living in an undisclosed location, suffering from cancer. He offered to surrender if authorities would guarantee medical treatment and a maximum of 1 year in prison given his age. He would turn himself in. The letter warranted serious analysis. Handwriting specialists compared it to prison records. DNA testing was attempted. Fingerprint comparisons were made. The results came back inconclusive. Not confirmed, not disproven, inconclusive. The authorities never publicly responded with a plea deal. The offer, if genuine, was never formally accepted. And John Anglin, if it was truly him, never appeared. The letter sits in evidence. The case sits open. 60 years of investigation. Thousands of hours of work by the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, oceanographers, forensic analysts, facial recognition experts, handwriting specialists, and journalists from every major outlet in the world. And still, no definitive answer. But if you take every piece of evidence and lay it out without assumption, what does it actually show? It shows that 3 men escaped from Alcatraz on the night of June 11, 1962. That part is not disputed. It shows that a car matching their planned vehicle was stolen in Marin County that same night by 3 men moving rapidly east the following morning. It shows that family members received anonymous contact, cards, flowers, personal messages, for over a decade after the escape. It shows that witnesses at 2 separate funerals reported seeing people they believed to be John and Clarence Anglin, attending in disguise and vanishing before anyone could reach them. It shows that a dying man told his family he had been in contact with the brothers since 1963. It shows that a 1975 photograph from Brazil matched John and Clarence Anglin in facial recognition analysis. It shows that a letter arrived in 2013 signed by John Anglin claiming all three survived. It shows that no bodies were ever recovered, not from the bay, not from the ocean, not anywhere. On the other side, the evidence that they died in the water consists of three things: a fragment of a raft found days later, a life jacket floating near the island, and the absence of any confirmed sighting. Compare those two bodies of evidence honestly. One side contains 11 years of anonymous contact, multiple witness accounts, a facial recognition match, a confession letter, a deathbed statement, a stolen car moving in the right direction. The other side contains a piece of rubber and an empty life jacket. The FBI's official position remains that they probably drowned. The U.S. Marshals keep the case open because they have never found proof of death. These two positions exist simultaneously, held by the same government. And the truth remains exactly where Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin left it on that cold June night. Unknown. 9 months after the escape, on March 21, 1963, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was permanently closed. The official reason given was cost. The facility was expensive to maintain. All of that was true, but the timing was not coincidental. The escape had done something to Alcatraz that no inmate, no riot, no legal challenge had ever done before. It had broken the myth. The story of the inescapable prison depended entirely on no one ever escaping it. The moment 3 men paddled out, that story was over. You cannot rebuild the myth of absolute security once the absolute has been broken. Alcatraz was not closed because it was too expensive. It was closed because it had been defeated. Today, Alcatraz Island is a national park. More than 1 million visitors walk through its corridors every year. They see the cells, they see the barbed wire, they see the cold water on every side. And almost every one of them stops in front of cells B152, B150, and B140. They look at the holes in the walls and wonders. The 3 dummy heads are on display in the prison museum. Preserved behind glass, the hollow plaster faces looking out at thousands of tourists every day. The fake hair, the painted features, the fragile work of men who spent months preparing the most elaborate deception in American prison history. The heads are famous now, photographed millions of times, in documentaries, books, films, articles. They were built to fool a guard for one night. Instead, they have been looked at by the world for 60 years. That was not the plan. But the whole point of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers was that they were always better at planning than anyone gave them credit for. The U.S. Marshals Service maintains that if any of the 3 men are still alive, they will continue to pursue them. Frank Morris would be 97 years old today. John Anglin would be 94. Clarence Anglin would be 93. If the 2013 letter was genuine, if John wrote it, if Frank and Clarence are gone, if John himself succumbed to the cancer he described, then all 3 men have died free. No cell, no handcuffs, no guards standing over them. Whatever their crimes, whatever their failures, they died outside the walls. If they are all gone, they took the truth with them. And if somehow, against all odds, one of them is still out there somewhere, 90+ years old, sitting in a chair in some quiet country far from San Francisco, watching the sun go down, then the greatest open case in American criminal history is still waiting for its last page. Alcatraz sits in the bay every night, lit up now for tourists, photographed from the bridge, visited by people who have read every account and watched every documentary. The rock is still there, but the 3 men who broke it, who took a spoon and a vacuum motor and 50 stolen raincoats and turned them into a key that opened the world's most secure door, are nowhere to be found. And that is exactly how they planned it. This case remains officially open. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin are listed as federal fugitives by the United States Marshals Service.